In Lecture 5, putting the curves together, we're going to put together the supply and demand curves that we've just built. We're going to assume some intermediate, it's not going to be a perfectly elastic demand curve, it's not going to be a perfectly inelastic demand curve, and the same for supply. They're just going to be those traditional downward sloping and upward sloping curves that we've looked at. But we're going to start to look at what happens when we graph these together. What happens when we bring the buyers and their demand curve in with the sellers and their supply curve? How is it that a market system can determine prices? And that's going to be told by what we call our market equilibrium. The market equilibrium is, so first a reminder, so the market is where the buyers and sellers come together to determine the price. So just a reminder, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in a face-to-face manner. It can be on a national level, international level, over the internet. You might never see your other counterpart, either the buyer or the seller. And so just keep in mind that that's any type of market is what we're talking about. It could be a farmer's market at the local level, or it could be an international agricultural market. All right, so the equilibrium is the price and quantity that are determined by the intersection of the supply and demand curves. So the place where our supply and demand curves intersect is going to be our market equilibrium. And at that market equilibrium, what we're saying is the quantity demanded is exactly equal to the quantity supplied. So it's not just that we have to look at necessarily curves, but we could also look at one of those schedules and determine at what price is the quantity demanded equal to the quantity supplied. And at that price, that's where we're going to see our equilibrium. That's the equilibrium price that we're going to refer to, and that's going to be the equilibrium quantity we refer to. Prices in an economy are going to fluctuate until supply and demand are equal. And we're going to talk about exactly why that happens in just a minute when we go through an example. All right, so the price where we see the intersection between the supply and demand curves, or the point at which the quantity demand is equal to the quantity supplied, we refer to that as the equilibrium price. That's the price we see when we go to the store and we go buy a gallon of milk. The equilibrium quantity is going to refer to that point at which the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So it's determining, or that equilibrium quantity is telling us how much is bought and sold in the market. All right, so let's go through an example here. So we have some buyers, and we can start to build that demand curve. So our price of $5, and we have a quantity demanded of 2,000. And so we can look at price and quantity. At a price of $4, we demand, the quantity demanded is 4,000. At $3, it's going to be 7,000. At $2, it's 11,000. And at $1, it's 16,000. And so you can see here, we have that downward sloping demand curve. Again, remember, price and quantity are inversely related when we're talking about demand. Buyers prefer low prices. The lower the price, the greater quantity that I'm going to demand. All right, so now let's look at our supply schedule. So we have a price of $5 and the quantity supplied is 12,000. At a price of 4, we see a quantity supplied of 4,000. 3, quantity supplied of 7,000. 2, a quantity supplied of 4,000. And at $1, we see a quantity supplied of 1,000 units. And so when we draw our supply curve, we have that upward sloping supply curve. When we're talking about supply, the law of supply tells us that price and quantity are directly related for sellers. Sellers and producers prefer high prices. The higher the price, the greater the quantity they supply. And because of that, we have that upward sloping supply curve. All right, so already we can determine the equilibrium price. But let's assume that I don't know what the equilibrium price in any given market is, right? So I'm going to go out and buy a new pair of shoes. I don't know what the equilibrium price is. Or if I'm going to go buy that gallon of milk, how do I know what the equilibrium price is? How does the market know what the equilibrium price is? Well, let's suppose in this market that first the price is set at 4 units. At 4 units, or $4, sorry, at $4, the quantity demanded is 4,000 units. So we can imagine there's 4,000 4,000 people in line to buy this product. Okay, so we have 4,000 people lined up to buy this product, but sellers are selling 10,000 units. So the first 4,000 units are bought, and then there's a surplus. There's 6,000 extra units. So what happens? So let's think about any store, your favorite clothing store. So when the price is set too high and they don't sell all their products off, what do? They lower the price. They put it on sale and they try to get more consumers to purchase the product. And so when we have a surplus, any price above our equilibrium, we're going to have a surplus. The quantity supplied is going to be greater than the quantity demanded. We're going to have a surplus, and until the sellers lower the price, they're going to have that surplus. They're not going to be able to get rid of it. So what if then they lower it too far? What if they lower it down to $2? So at $2, we can see that the quantity demanded is 11,000. So there's 11,000 people in line to purchase the product. But the sellers only want to sell 4,000 units. So now we have a shortage. We're short 7,000 units. The first 4,000 units get bought up, and then 7,000 people are standing there waiting for a product. And so sellers, what do? They see, well, I know I only have 4,000 units for sale, but there's 11,000 people knocking at my door. What am I going to do? I'm going to increase my price. So at any price below the equilibrium, what we're going to see is a shortage existing. The quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And then we're going to see prices increase. And prices increase and they fluctuate. So if they went up to $3.50, we would still have a surplus and we'd lower the price. It goes down to $2.50. We'd still have a shortage and prices would go up. And they're going to continue to fluctuate until we hit that equilibrium. And we can just see the equilibrium here at a price of $3. The quantity demanded is 7,000. At a price of $3, the quantity supplied is 7,000. And so there's 7,000 people in line to purchase the product and 7,000 units available, and we are exactly at our equilibrium. And so we have an equilibrium price of $3 and an equilibrium quantity of 7,000 units. All right, so that shows us our market equilibrium. Our prices are going to fluctuate until we hit that equilibrium price. At any price above the equilibrium, we're going to see a surplus occurring. There's a greater quantity supplied than there is demanded. Why? Because sellers like high prices more than buyers do, and so they're going to be willing to supply more than what buyers are going to be willing to purchase. And so we're going to experience a surplus. At any price below the equilibrium, buyers are going to be more happy. There's going to be more buyers in the market than sellers. The equilibrium is the point at which buyers and sellers are equally happy. There's the exact amount of quantity demand for the quantity supplied. All buyers who want to purchase the product at that price receive the product. All sellers who want to sell the product at that price sell the product. And so it's a perfect, it's the sweet spot of economics, that equilibrium. All right, so now let's go through some let's go through some questions. So which of the following schedules shows an individual following the law of demand for a cup of coffee? So I want you to think about, what does the law of demand say about the relationship between price and quantity? And I'm going to give you a few minutes to go through and determine, does that individual, person 1, person 2, person 3, and person 4, follow the law of demand? All right, so hopefully you've paused, determined whether each of the individuals follow the law of demand. So for person 1, when the price of the product is $1, they buy 2 units of coffee. But when the price is $5, they buy 10 units of coffee. That is crazy, right? As the price goes up, they buy more. Who buys more when things become more expensive? That is, again, not going to be the case. And so person 1 does not follow the law of demand. There's not an inverse relationship between price and quantity. Person 2, when price of coffee is $1, they buy 6 units, and for all other prices, they buy 2 units. This is a very inelastic demand, but it does follow the law of demand, because at that low price, they purchased a significant amount, but as the price increased from 1 to 2, they dropped their demand down, and they just have a very inelastic demand. At 2, they always want to consume 2 cups of coffee. So person 2 does follow the law of demand. However, person 3 does not follow the law of demand, because yes, they have very inelastic demand, but when the price increases to 5 units, then they increase their consumption to 6 cups of coffee. And that again is not following the law of demand. And then finally, person 4, we can see that is a traditional example of a law of demand. We see that as the price increases each dollar, we start to consume less and less coffee. And so person 4 and person 2 are the people that do follow the law of demand. All right, now let's go on the supply side. So determine which of these companies follow the law of supply. And I'll give you a few minutes to do that. All right, so hopefully you've looked at these 4 businesses and determined which of these businesses follow the law of supply. All right, so the first, Starbucks, has as a price of 1, 0, as a price of 2, 0, but then as the price continues to increase, they increase the quantity they supply. And so Starbucks, yes, does follow the law of supply. iMac, as the price increases from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, the quantity that they supply falls. That does not follow the law of supply. Cool Beans, as the price increases, they have very inelastic supply until we get to from $4 to $5. Then they reduce the quantity that they supply. Again, not following the law of supply. And then finally, Drip, they also have very inelastic supply, but it does follow the law of supply, because as we jump from $1 to $2, we do increase the quantity we supply. So Starbucks and Drip do follow the law of supply, while iMac and Cool Beans do not. All right, so let's take person 4 and Drip and let's draw out our supply and demand curve and determine the equilibrium price from there. So I want everyone to take a few minutes to pause this and make sure you can determine the equilibrium price and quantity, and also draw in the equilibrium price and quantity on this graph. All right, so hopefully you've taken the time to draw in your supply and demand curves. All right, so let's first do that demand. So at $1, the quantity demanded is 10 units. All right, and then at $2, the quantity demanded is 8 units. I don't know what happened to that. There we go. And then at $3, the quantity demanded is 6 units. And at $4, the quantity demanded is 4 units. And at $5, the quantity demanded is 2 units. And so we can connect those points. And we have that traditional downward sloping demand curve. For Drip, we do know that it has very inelastic supply, but we can still draw in that demand curve. So for at $1, we supply 2 units. And then for every other price, the quantity that we supply is going to be 4 and 5. And let me get that one back in. All right, and so what we see for a supply curve is a little unconventional, but a very inelastic supply curve. And so from here, we can determine our equilibrium price is going to be $3. And our equilibrium quantity is going to be 6 units. And so our equilibrium right here is at the intersection of that supply and demand curve. We can also go over here to our schedule and see that the quantity supplied and quantity demanded at $3, they're equal. And at no other price do we see that occurring. And that is because the law of demand and supply indicate that there will only be one equilibrium price and one equilibrium quantity. All right, so hopefully you've gotten this good introduction into economics and the idea of supply and demand and the intersection that causes us to have that equilibrium. And that's how prices are determined under that market system. As we move forward to the next module, oh, actually we have one more lecture in this module. What we're going to be talking about is that producer and consumer surplus that we briefly touched on in each of those introductions to the supply and demand curves.